everyone. Welcome back to another College Chats podcast. On this episode, we're going to talk to a guest about his brand new book, which just so happens to be a subject very close to my heart, which is SEC football. But first, we are the Chaps. I'm George, and I'm joined by Ollie and Alex tonight. How are you both?
Yeah, doing well. A little bit longer to wait till SEC football, unfortunately for you boys, but just over 2 weeks until the actual start of the college football season. All ACC clash in Dublin. I'm very excited for it. I'm just excited for college football. The more I spend time writing, talking, listening about the 2024 college football season, like the more I get excited about it, I think it's going to be one of the best, honestly, that we've had for a long time. And excited to talk about the future of college football, the past of college football, and everything in between with you boys and our guest tonight.
I hate going second on this fucking bit because Ollie always steals the shit that I want to say. Like, just every single time. No, I'm glad to be here. I've actually turned the Olympics off as well. So, listeners, you should be grateful that I'm actually giving this my full undivided attention for once, which, is unlike me. So, I'm looking forward to this chat and let's get going.
Our guest should be happy with the outcome of the 1500 meters. I think we're all slightly disappointed with what happened in the 1500 meters, but there you go. That's water under the bridge. Our guest founded and was a senior writer for College Football Wire before moving across to write for the iconic Lundy's College Football magazine. He is a native of Utah and has been in and around football for decades, including spells working in bowl games administration before making his writing debut as author of BYU versus Utah, A Decade of Drama. While Ollie and Alex might want to talk about that book, there is zero chance of that happening as we're here to talk about his latest book, brand new book, SEC Football, How a Regional League Became a National Obsession. So it's awesome to welcome Colby Newton. Colby, hi, how are you?
I'm doing great, and it's an honor and a thrill to be on with you guys in this podcast, and just can't wait to talk to you guys a little bit more about it. I echo what's been said. The season's around the corner, and I can't be more excited about it.
Just a word of warning, when these guys want to talk about Utah football and all that kind of stuff, just keep on fending them off. We can do that on another podcast when you come back to talk about it, talk to us. So the book is out now. It was launched, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So tell us a bit about the book. How did the idea come about? And as I mentioned, you're from Utah, so how does someone from Utah write a book about the SEC?
Yeah, book is out. It was launched on July 16th, and it's going very well. So excited about that. And yeah, from Utah, I think that actually lends a little bit of a unique perspective to write about the SEC because I'm not too close to the fire to really have any kind of bias towards it and have I think, a nice outsider perspective on it. I've been a college football fan for as long as I can remember. And when I was a little boy, the very first college football player, even really include the NFL, the first football player I knew of was Herschel Walker at Georgia when he was running wild down there and winning the Heisman Trophy. So kind of ever since then, the SEC has been something that I've been passionate about. And then when they started to be broadcast on CBS, that was about the time I was in high school, and it just kind of took off from there. And so I've always been a huge fan of the SEC. And when I thought about, I wanted to write another book. You mentioned that first book I wrote. That's been 5 or 6 years now. And I thought about the SEC was just like every other league for decades. And then something happened in the early 2000s. And I just wondered, is there a story there? What happened? Could I explore that? And is there enough for a book? And there was.
And tell me, Kobe, just from a kind of, and you're very much an insider now, but from an outsider's perspective, when you were in Utah and watching SEC football, I mean, for those people who are in the southeast and watch that football, there's no question to them that that's the biggest and best conference. And what's the perception outside of the league in terms of how it ranks alongside the Big Ten, Big 12, etc.?
Yeah, outside the Southeast US, I think now everyone understands and believes it's the best league. And I hear a lot of people say that they don't like the SEC, and that's what I think is partly what gives it its allure, is whether you like it or you don't, you care about it. You care about the SEC. You're either rooting for the teams to win or you're rooting against them. And there's no other league like that. In the West, people don't have the same passion for the Big Ten. They might like Michigan, Ohio State, but otherwise they're kind of apathetic towards it. And that's what I think it makes the SEC unique is you care. As a college football fan, you care about the league one way or the other.
Talked about the how exciting the 2024 college football season is, and one of the reasons for that is conference expansion, conference realignment. You talk about in your book about the first period of SEC expansion, the addition of Arkansas, the addition of South Carolina. How important has expansion been to that story of the SEC? You talked about, the early 2000s and that explosion of the SEC as a major force in college football. How important has expansion been, and what are your thoughts on the latest expansion and realignment in the college football landscape ahead of the season?
Expansion's been huge. It's been a huge part of what has set the SEC apart. And we talk a lot about that in the book. When they grabbed South Carolina and Arkansas, I mean, you guys know you can't get away from the talk now about expansion. It's like it's its own monster that has been created. It wasn't always like that, and we forget that now. And so it was interesting to go back and research it. It was leagues stayed the same for decades, and the SEC was one of those leagues. You had 3 teams leave the conference in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they did not backfill those teams. And when South Carolina and Arkansas joined the league, in particular, Arkansas was the very first school to jump from one at the time power conference to another. Penn State had joined the Big Ten a few months earlier, but they were an independent. So that didn't have quite the same magnitude as far as impacting the landscape of college football as when South Carolina and Arkansas joined. And without that happening, you don't have the conference title game that came a few years later. And I don't think you have the contract with CBS. And those 3 pieces, to me, are the foundational aspect of what helped the SEC become who it became in the early 2000s, where it all of a sudden turned into a situation where we, as all college football fans, were surprised when the SEC didn't win a national championship. And yet you go from that period where you're talking about, Ollie, that South Carolina, Arkansas joined, they were in the middle of a drought. 1981, Georgia wins the national championship. They didn't win another national championship for 11 years. Like, our brains can't even comprehend the SEC going 11 seasons without a national championship. And that's what happened. So yeah, conference expansion, huge part of the SEC story.
And just some of your thoughts on the recent college football realignment. Obviously, Arkansas pertinent again, because with Texas coming into the SEC, there's rekindling of or reigniting rivalries, let's say. I know on SEC Media Days, there's a lot of talk about Arkansas and Texas rivalry and how more important it is now that they're both in the SEC. Just some of your thoughts on that impact in the landscape going forward.
I think it's going to be huge. I don't know what you guys think about it, but Texas and Oklahoma fit into the culture of the SEC. I've had the opportunity to go to the Red River rivalry there and in the Cotton Bowl and see what it's like to have Texas play Oklahoma. That just fits culturally. It's a little bit different than what's going on with the Big Ten, where now you're going to have a conference game between UCLA and Maryland. That's maybe a little bit of a different stance on it. So Arkansas and Texas. There's a funny quote in the book when Arkansas, who was led by Frank Broyles, their legendary coach, he was the athletic director at the time that Arkansas and the SEC got together. The football coach at the time, the head coach, went to Broyles and said, "Are you sure that we want to join the SEC? We have a hard time beating Texas right now. There's 5 Texases over there in the SEC." And how right he was. And now back to your point, Ollie, they got away from Texas and now they're back with Texas again.
Let's go back to that period that you kind of touched on a little bit there, that 60s to 90s period, because really the Bear Bryant era essentially of SEC football was when it really started to grow into a conference that was going to compete for national championships. Kind of looking at the significant changes that happened then with that, real figurehead of a head coach, and then compare it to now where an Alabama head coach, a legendary Alabama head coach, has left the SEC, and now they're going through significant change as a conference. Where does it look in 30 years' time? And looking back, how important was Bear Bryant in that first 30-year period in the 60s?
Yeah, as you guys know, the coach makes all the difference. And what Bear Bryant did at Alabama, he stood on the shoulders of a couple other men. Wallace Wade and Frank Thomas were two great coaches that won national championships before Bryant. But there was a real period in the mid 50s of, Alabama fans would say, darkness, where they did not get the right coach. And then they went through that again when Bryant retired, and it took them a while. They had Gene Stallings. He won a national title, but it really wasn't a dynasty until Nick Saban went. So there was a period of 15, 20 years there as well where they didn't get the coach right. Well, they finally did get the coach right with Nick Saban, and he, in essence, replicated what Bryant did, right? Is Kalen DeBoer, is he going to be a Bear Bryant and Nick Saban, or is he going to be one of these other coaches that doesn't have the success that you need? And we talk a little bit in the book about Bill Curry when Alabama hired him. Bit of an outsider. He had all sorts of obstacles thrown his way because he wasn't from the Bear Bryant tree. And it's just going to be fascinating to watch to see. I know everybody's really excited about it right now, about Kalen and what he's doing. But what do the next 30 years look like? Man, I don't know. And if you don't get the coach right, you're in trouble. And it's shown that time after time when it comes to even the very best of programs like Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a real period, or there's a real phenomenon in sport that you don't ever want to be the guy replacing the guy, right? And I think that will massively sort of comes into play a lot throughout SEC history as well as across the list of sports. You you talked a little bit in the book about Nick Saban, especially about him and Urban Meyer when they were together, when Meyer was at Florida. So how did the way they recruited and how they almost turned recruiting into a real science in that early period with the two of them together in those jobs, how did that change the SEC and change the landscape of it?
Yeah, Alex, it changed everything. And that's such a great point by you. And to just follow up on what you said about not being the guy that follows the guy, there was a real interesting story that took place 100 years ago when Wallace Wade at Alabama created kind of the first Alabama dynasty. He left because of the expectations that he had created. He finally said, you guys are crazy now. I need to leave and get out of here. And now Duke's Stadium is named after him. So that's such a huge part of it. And so to the recruiting, Nick Saban and Urban Meyer, we go an entire chapter on those two, both coming at the same time. And I'll offer you guys this, and you tell me what you think. I often wonder what would have happened if Saban and Meyer weren't competing against each other at the same time as it led to recruiting, because I think those two pushed each other, and in so doing lifted the whole league. The whole rest of the league thought, oh man, we got to raise our game with facilities, we got to raise our game with recruiting, or these two are going to leave us behind. And so they changed everything. And the SEC does not win national championships without Saban and Meyer recruiting the way that they did.
Yeah, I think competition is so important. Yeah, coach college athletics myself as a professional volleyball coach here, and you don't get better unless there's someone pushing you to get better. And I think that you summed it up brilliantly. If they weren't competing against one another, we probably wouldn't have seen the steps. I'm going to say forward tentatively, because I'm not a massive fan about how college athletes are recruited nowadays. But I don't think you see those steps if there aren't people recruiting. And then they created that kind of culture now where everyone is competing in the recruiting space all the time.
Yeah.
And
I
It's
think you're
become the
right.
determinant, right, of whether you can compete for a national championship. If you don't have the 5 stars, the 4 5 star kids on your team, you're not going to compete for a national championship now in modern college football. So it's definitely a crazy outcome, a crazy effect that they've had on the sport.
Yeah, and I think you look at Bear Bryant, maybe didn't have that foil. He had Johnny Vaught a little bit with Ole Miss, but he was younger. Vaught was older. Vince Dooley did some things at Georgia, won a national championship, but I don't think we saw anything in the SEC similar to Urban and Nick Saban. And maybe you have it now with a multitude of different coaches. Brian Kelly at LSU has got some things going. Even Hugh Freeze, I'm seeing a lot of things about him at Auburn right now with recruiting. So yeah, you don't have the recruits, you're not going to win.
That opens up a kind of interesting dynamic, doesn't it, Colby, about those kind of sliding door moments. What if something happened? What if something didn't happen? The benefit of, doing your research over what is frankly decades of football. What was your kind of your favorite sliding doors moment from that period, and what if something happened?
Yeah, we could talk for 2 hours about all the different, what ifs. I'll give you one that I didn't know about. Maybe you guys already knew this had happened when Nick Saban took the job at Toledo. So this is early 90s. Urban Meyer was a young assistant coach hungry for the next step. He tried to get a hold of Nick Saban to get a job on his staff. He couldn't reach Saban. He got his wife, and she was just thought this is the greatest guy ever. So Urban Meyer said, look, when your husband gets home, you need to have him call me back. I think I could really be of assistance to his staff. Well, Nick Saban comes home, and Miss Terry tells him about it, and he says, I don't know who that is. I'm not going to call him. And he never calls him. What would have happened if Nick Saban and Urban Meyer teamed up at some point? I mean, we're sitting here talking about it, right, with the recruiting, and 10 years later, they end up, well, 15 years later, they end up on opposite sides of the field, both winning national championships. That was one where I didn't know that story had happened. And who knows what would have gone down with that. So that was one that was really intriguing. There's a few with Alabama. I mean, Bear Bryant was driving to interview for the job at Arkansas, which was his home state when Pearl Harbor was attacked, and he turned the car around and joined the services. So what would have happened there if he would have gone to his home state, right, his home school of Arkansas? So there's a ton of stories like that where it's like, man, there's so many serendipitous things that happened just at the right time to make it work.
That's a pretty shocking story in its own right. That thought of what if Saban and Urban Meyer had worked together. You've obviously I can't even begin to put a number on the amount of research that you've done for the book. What took you by surprise when you were researching the book? And was like a standout story that shocked you to your very core while you were conducting your research for SEC football?
Yeah, lots of research. And for a college football / history nerd like me, I loved every second of it. So it was fun. And I'll give you a couple. I think what surprised me, and I guess maybe I knew this, but didn't know to the extent that Florida really was dependent on Steve Spurrier. They did not have a historically great program before Spurrier showed up as a player, and then he won the Heisman Trophy and then left, and they weren't that great for a long time until he came back. And then they won all sorts of championships, SEC and national championships. So that was one that surprised me. I think we look at Florida today and maybe sometimes assume they're on the same level from a historical championship standpoint as some of these other programs like in Alabama and Ohio State, Notre Dame. And they're not, although they're in a fantastic program. I'll tell you what shocked me and was really sobering. We talk in some detail about the breaking of the color barrier in the late 60s and early 70s. And my goodness, some of the things that these African-American athletes had to go through to just be the people that broke through, whether it was the very first Black player that scored a touchdown in an SEC stadium, Nate Northington was the first African American to play for an SEC team in an SEC game at Kentucky. And so that period of time in the mid 60s into the mid 70s, there's some sobering reminders of what it used to be like, and the courage that these young men, I mean, a 20-year-old kid has to go through to break through these barriers was really interesting to go back and look at.
Yeah, definitely. Just such a well for us, for a lot of our listeners, especially on the UK side of things, it's not a period of history that we learn a huge amount about unless you go out and learn about it for yourself. And I can't even imagine what that's like to go into that scenario and just to face what they had to face, and as you say, the barriers that they had to pass over. Were there sort of any other like real poignant stories that stand out to you? I don't want to spoil too much of your book because we want people to go out and buy it, but were there any like real poignant stories that stood out that throughout the history?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go into a little bit more detail about Nate Northington. He was being recruited by Kentucky. Kentucky's administration felt like they were going to have funding pulled. So, as much as you wish it was more of coming from a good place, that's why they decided to start recruiting African American athletes. So Northington actually found himself at an all-state banquet at the governor's mansion. He was heavily leaning towards going to Purdue in Indiana to play in the North. It took the governor pulling him aside and saying, "Listen, we're going to protect you. We'll take care of you and make sure that you do okay if you do decide to go to University of Kentucky." So it's little things like that you read, and like you say, I can't even imagine or fathom what that's like. I mean, I'm an old man, especially as an 18-year-old kid that's got to decide where they're going to go to college and are they going to be safe. And same thing with a couple of the players at Alabama. It took Bear Bryant saying to them, "Look, if there's ever any trouble, you need to come talk to me." And it was their parents that said, "Look, somebody's got to go do it. You're given this opportunity. Why don't you go do it?" So things like that were really fun to go back and look at, just because, like you say, kind of forget about it a little bit, and we never should.
Colby, your book is obviously packed with incredible stories, and as Alex says, we want people to go out and buy the book, read those stories. And you've written for one of, I think it's fair to say, one of the most prestigious magazines in America where college football is concerned, with Lindy's. But I want to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, because you were involved with bowl game administration for around 15 years. I absolutely love bowl. I know he swore then. I know he pulled an Alex, but I love bowl season. That's how passionate and excited I am about it. Let's talk about your favorite bowl game, and what's your favorite memory of being in and around that environment, that postseason environment?
Well, I'm glad we got some bowl game fans here. Bowls are unlike anything else. And yeah, I was fortunate to be involved in a number of bowl games for a long time. Spent the most time at Gator Bowl in Jacksonville, Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, and the Holiday Bowl in San Diego. They all were very different and had their unique qualities to it. But for me, there's nothing like New Orleans, New Year's, right? New Year's Eve, and the SEC. That's quite the combo for all sorts of things that you end up seeing. And so Sugar Bowl for me was always a really great treat to go and be a part of it. I don't know if any of you guys have ever been inside the Superdome. Have you?
I've been to the Sugar Bowl.
Alex has been to the Sugar
You've
Bowl.
been
We're
as
just
well,
waiting.
George, haven't you?
We've just been waiting for Alex to leap in with his "I've been to the Sugar Bowl" story. As soon as you said Sugar Bowl, I saw Alex's face light up. I was like, I'm waiting for him to interrupt a guest.
Well, good. I'm glad you guys know. You know how great the Sugar Bowl can be. So, yeah, that's probably that was my favorite one to go to. Favorite memory: the Sugar Bowl at the time was tied to the BCS National Championship game. So you would have the Sugar Bowl on the first, and then you'd have the BCS title game about a week later. And when Alabama played LSU in the title game, the whole rest of the country hated it and they were mad because you had two SEC teams in the national title game. I loved it. And to stand on the sideline and see Alabama win that game, it wasn't the greatest game. I believe it was like 21-0 was the final. But to have two SEC teams in that building, you guys know what that place is like. The passion, the intensity, like you just, until you've experienced it, you don't understand what it's like, because any SEC game where you have two big programs going at it is huge. But for the national title inside the Superdome, oh man, it was the best.
Almost as good as the famous Idaho Potato Bowl. I just want to play devil's advocate because this wasn't on the script that we sent to you, but bowl season, obviously, you said it's great to hear people are fans of the bowl season because it is a time of year and there's structure with the new college football playoff format and the opt-outs from players that we've seen in recent years. It's a structure that is under a lot of intense scrutiny and pressure. Well, how do you see the future of bowl season?
Yeah, I think they're in trouble. I think they're in trouble. It honestly was a part of the reason why I decided to get out of it. I kind of thought that this isn't going to last beyond a certain number of years. And so this year is going to be fascinating to see. What are the ratings like for the famous Idaho Potato Bowl? And we're all sitting around. It's the holidays. There's not a whole lot going on. And so we're putting these games on and we're watching them like crazy. Will we still do that? If we do, then they're going to be just fine. And we'll still have those bowl games. But if the ratings start to slide because we're so intense on those, 11 playoff games that we'll have with the 12, or maybe it's 8, there's going to be some attention taken away from that. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think it's difficult. It was already difficult, I think, before the college football playoff expansion. I think what you've got to rely on is, like you said, it's holiday season. People want to watch football like whenever they can. You've got to rely on that. That's going to continue as traditionally it always has. And with the invention, if NIL can be used for one, it's being used for a lot of positives. I shouldn't say if it can be used for one positive, but you see now things like the Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre Arizona Bowl, Gin and Juice Bowl, whatever the official title is. They're giving the NIL opportunities to players who play in that game. That's going to become a more popular and consistent theme, I suspect, going forward. So NIL could be actually the savior of college football bowl games in more ways than one, because players are going to stay in college longer. We're seeing that already because of NIL. And then if there's a direct NIL benefit to playing in a bowl game, they could be the savior of bowl season, right?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. That's an
It
aspect.
was interesting that Sam Pittman talked about bowl games at ST Media Days and very passionately talked about the experience opportunity for younger players that can come in. So to Ollie's point, players that can remain on the roster and get that experience and that opportunity to, and if they're getting paid for it, then I can see where there's definitely a push to retain them. But to your point, Colby, isn't it all about money, right? So it's where the money's going to be derived, which is probably sadly going to be the deciding factor in all of this, I would have thought.
Yeah, well, I'll be watching, and it sounds like you guys are going to be watching. So hopefully, we're not the only ones, and I can still watch the Bahamas Bowl and all these others on like December 15th or whatever it is when these teams are playing, and it's fun. Like you say, the younger players get to play, and some of these teams that are good teams from some of the other leagues. I don't know why I end up being drawn to MAC bowl games for some odd reason. It's like all of a sudden I find myself watching a Central Michigan bowl game, but that's just
Chips are going to be good this year. Chip, you'll be watching the Central Michigan bowl game come December, I think.
good.
They got some talented players this year.
Yeah, there was a separate podcast with Ollie and Colby talking about Maxion bowl games for the next 3 hours. So you picked the best or maybe the wrong podcast to be on. When we said Oliver loves ball games. He genuinely watches every ball game. As I say, Alex has been to the Sugar Bowl, so you've got a captive audience here. But we've run out of time, so that's all we've got time for on this episode. It's been awesome speaking with Colby. Colby, you mentioned the book is out. Tell our listeners where I was going to say when, but where can we get the book from?
Yeah, you can order it on Amazon. You can order it on Barnes and Noble. And if you're in the States, you can get it in any of the Southeastern independent bookshops. But like I said before, I really believe if you like college football, if you like the SEC, if you want to learn more about why they became the best conference in college football, I think you'll like the book. So hope to pick it up and hope you like it.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time out to come and talk to us. As you know, Colby joins a long list of truly awesome guests on this podcast. So if you haven't already, please check out our previous episodes. And if you like what you hear, why wouldn't you? Please rate, review, and subscribe. You can follow us on social media. Our social media accounts are at College Chaps. Thank you to Colby, Ollie, and Alex for their brilliant input. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and well, and catch you all next time.